Thank you very much for coming here. Today, I mean, we don't have a lot of time. We have like 35 minutes for this, and this used to be like 45, so let's see how this goes. Today, I'm going to talk to you about what I've been doing at Sky for the last kind of like 2 years and a half, which is trying to modularize our code base. And the talk, as the title suggests, is going to be a very honest retrospective, so I'm just going to be telling you the things that we made wrong, that I did wrong, and things that I wish I knew if I was starting doing this thing again. So we're going to see some very ugly code, and I'm sure you'll enjoy that. The actual title of the talk is why we fail at modularizing Sky Sports. So this is the app that I'm going to be talking about, but I couldn't really use that on the title, and you will see now why. So like I said, my name is Marcus. That's my Twitter handle there. I'm going to be tweeting there all the slides and some more resources after the talk. And I used to work at Sky, and I work at the Sky Sports mainly, and then I also did work on the Sky News app and my Sky app. But I started working for DuckDuckGo a few weeks ago, which is why I couldn't really put Sky Sports on the title of the app, because on the title of the talk, because I don't really work there anymore. So everything that I'm going to be talking about today is based on my experience at Sky. Okay, just so you keep that in mind. And I wanted to start with this sentence, like common sense is not that common, which doesn't really mean that people lack or don't have common sense. So what it really means is that common sense is just based on human experiences and people's individual perceptions. So what I think is common sense might not apply to what you think is common sense. And for this talk, what it really means is that I'm going to be talking about a very specific way of modularizing an app. And there are like multiple ways that you can do that. So just take what I said with a pinch of salt and apply and use the things that make sense to you, because probably most of them, they won't make sense, and you'll be like, oh, but this is not what we want to do, or this is not what we need. So just discard what you don't need and then use what you can. But we're here to talk about the Sky Sports app. So this is our app. And we actually support multiple territories. So we have an app in the UK. We also support Germany, Italy, Spain. And then we also have a few more countries like Canada, US, Australia. And for some reason that no one really understands, we also have Nigeria. Go figure. But the trick here is that that's not one app. And that's why I've been using different colors. So in reality, what we have is multiple apps. And they're kind of like similar, but you can see like the designs are different. Some of the features are a bit different. They might be the same feature, but with some slightly differences there. And it's a bit of like a crazy world to live in. So the way this works is, the way that we decided to make this thing work like back 3 years ago was by using flavors. And in case if you don't know how this works, the typical structure you're going to end up with is you're going to have your app module, which has a source package, which has a main package, and then on top of that, you have one package per flavor. So to kind of like explain this in a little bit more detail, just get rid of one of those flavors and we can focus on UK and Germany. So the way this works is if I create a new feature in my main package, then that feature is available in UK and Germany. That makes sense. And if I create a feature in the UK package, then that's only going to be available in the UK, right? But now let's say that some annoying product owner comes to you and says, hey, I want to do something different for UK. I want to add, I don't know, like a different color for the toolbar. So you go, you modify your feature in main, and everything's great. Everything works in the UK. But because we have a very big team and the communication at that point wasn't that great, and it's everything working with the same code base, and it's actually the same code, then it turns out that someone just broke Germany, because he didn't know that that feature was also being used there. And we have here like a real scenario. So this is a commit message from myself back in 2017, which is very similar to what I said. And the word again there should tell you that this wasn't the first time that this thing happened. What's even funnier is that not even a week later, we had the same bug regressed again. And if you're thinking, Marcos, just write unit tests for Christ's sake, I'll come to that later on the talk, because like unit tests and tests are very important in this whole kind of topic. So here we are, right, using flavors which take like really long time to build, because every time you want to build one flavor, you have to build all the other ones. There is no way around that. You change something in one, and you end up just breaking a lot of them. It's very painful to work with, especially if you have manual testers, because if you make a change in the UK, you have to tell them, hey, you need to check all these other 5 apps as well, which is very painful. And it doesn't scale for that same reason. So these were our reasons to modularize our code base and to start thinking about that. You might have different reasons, and this is where we started off. And once you get to this kind of point where you know that, well, this thing that we're doing doesn't really work, then you need to do something. You need to convince people that you need to change your approach. And it turns out that convincing people is actually very hard. So if you go to your teammates, to your colleagues, and you say, hey, I think we need to modularize our code base, right? Because we're going to be doing some modules, and then it's not going to be, the compile time is not going to be that long, and so on and so forth. So they know your pain points. So convincing them is actually not going to be that hard. The problem is when you have to convince people that are not in your team. And the problem is that once you have a product that's being released and is doing very well on the store, making a point for refactoring it or rewrite it is not that simple, because you're still going to have deadlines, you're still going to have features that you need to ship, and the reality is that someone has to pay for this work. So modularizing, rewriting code doesn't come for free. The money has to come from somewhere, and those are the people that you need to convince, which is a bit tricky depending on your company. In our case, Sky is a very, very big company, so there is a lot of red tape, and I think it took us probably like 6-7 months to actually get the money to have a team who could just focus on modularizing. And it didn't come for free either, because it came with this concept of, or vision, that the people that gave us the money had. So this is what they thought that we were supposed to do. And it also came with this concept of a showcase app, which I'll talk about later. So this whole vision was basically that we should be able to go to a website, click on different features, click on a build button, and then create an app, just like that. So if I go to a website, then I can just say, oh, I want to have a toolbar with these colors. Oh, I want to have also an article list. And on top of that, I want to select like a video carousel feature, and so on and so forth. And obviously, we didn't do that, but to convince them, we had to do something similar. So we built like a few small modules. We built a plugin for Android Studio, and we were able to demonstrate that within a couple of minutes in Android Studio, we could just right-click in a few different places and just build a new app. And that's the way that we convinced them to give us the money. And this also was a very, very useful exercise, because we had to ask ourselves, well, what is really a module? And in our case, it was a bit straightforward, because one of the things is that we knew that we wanted to share features across all our different apps. So we went ahead and and we create feature modules and then core module, because everyone needs core, right? By the way, these feature modules are nothing to do with like Android feature modules as in instant apps. This is just like, this is my feature, so I'll just create a module for that one. So let's leave core aside and let's focus on what a module is. And for us, a module is, or should be, nothing but a black box that has a set of inputs and a set of outputs. And because we knew that we wanted to modify the inside behavior in some cases, we also had a set of listeners or callbacks, whatever you want to call them. So from the app point of view, the app just sends a lot of inputs. It gets an output, which could be an activity, a fragment, anything like that, and then implements all those listeners to do whatever it needs to do. Which brings us to the question of what is a feature. And this might seem like a very simple question, but it's not that simple, really. So if we replace our empty module and we say that what we have is an article list feature, which just shows you like a list of articles that you can read, we're probably going to have an article list activity there. That makes sense. But we might also want to have, like, I don't know, like a web view activity, because when the user clicks on an article, we want to take them to the actual article. So the question is, what do we do with this thing? Like, do we keep them together in the same module, or do we separate them? And in this case, it kind of like makes sense to separate them, because the app now, the only thing it has to do is implement the on-article click listener, which will send the user to our article reader module. And this opens a lot of different possibilities, because now you don't really have to have an article list. You can just have an item list. And it could take you to an article, or it could take you to a video. It could take you to different places depending on that. And you don't have all of them coupled together in a very big module. And this decision, which here seems something simple and very easy, is not always like that. So I'll talk about our first module. This is the first module that we tried to modularize. So back like 2.5 years ago or so, this is how our app looked like. So a bunch of features separated in packages, and we had this one called streaming. And this is the first module that we decide to just take out from the app and put separately. And it was just out of necessity. It was because we had to release a new app, and for legal reasons, it couldn't have all these binaries inside there. So this is what we did, right? So we just took this module and we put it away, and we thought that was it. But it wasn't really like that, because to get to the actual streaming of a TV channel, you had to go through a list of TV channels first. And that was very, very coupled to the whole streaming experience. So again, the decision was like, well, do we keep them together or do we separate them? And for a lot of reasons, we actually kept them together, which is something that I think 2 years after, we're probably still regretting about this. And this was weird, and it was a very, very strange thing, because we started with an extremely complicated feature. And to make things worse, we also had a hard deadline. And it was mainly done by one person, who was the only person in the team who really understood how the whole streaming was done, because he actually built the whole thing in the first place. And obviously, this was a very bad first example for a module, because here we are, right, trying to modularize our code base. We're trying to create the first module, which should be the standard to follow. And we have a hard deadline, so we're rushing things, and there's just one person doing it. And yeah, it was a very, very bad experience. So maybe instead you should start with the easiest module that you can modularize. So after 2 or 3 months after this streaming like fiasco and cleaning up the code and making things kind of like work again, I went ahead and modularized our easiest module, which was, well, splash screen, because there is nothing easier than that. But there is a problem with this. Like, it is so simple that there is literally nothing to do there. And there is no standards to follow because, well, it's nothing. It's just a splash screen, right? So maybe instead of starting with this, you should probably start with the most valuable. Like, which is the feature that is going to give you the most value after it's being modularized? And it's a very easy way to sell things to product owners as well. Because if you go and tell them, hey, I just want to modularize the splash screen, they're going to be like, why? It's just a splash screen. But if you go and tell them, oh, I want to modularize the article list because it's the main feature of our apps, and it has a lot of bugs that are really hard to fix. So I think if we do this, it's going to be easier for us to build new apps, and it's going to be better for the users. They're not going to complain as much, and so on and so forth. And of course, you should integrate your modules as soon as possible. And it's going to be painful, because your app is not going to be ready for them yet. But like, just to show you kind of like an example, we renovated our bathroom last summer. So this is how it looked like after it was finished. But before we got to that stage, we went through hell, like literally. It was the worst 3 weeks of my life. And this is pretty similar to what's going to happen with your app. It's going to be hacky. Like, it's going to be very, very hacky in some places. But as long as all that hackiness happens in your app, then you're going to be fine. And I know that might sound weird, because I'm just telling you, just start doing some hacky things in your app that's in production. But the important thing that you need to follow here is that you don't want to compromise your modules. Because, like I said, this is the standard to follow. So if you start thinking about how can you integrate those modules into your app, then you're going to be doing something wrong, because you're going to be writing some code that's going to be very specific to your app. And if you want to be able to share that module, that's going to be a problem in the future. So I guess now is a good time to move into one of our most lovely topics in Android, which is dependency injection. So this is what we had in our streaming module at that point. So we also had core module, because you need core, right? So app and streaming, they all depend on core. The app depends on streaming, so that's fine, makes sense. But it turns out that streaming also needs a user. And that user is created in the app. So basically what you're doing here is that streaming kind of like depends on the app as well. So you need a way to pass that user from the app to your streaming module. And we were using Dagger at that point, before modularizing everything, and it was a very simple kind of like approach. So we had a main component, and for each feature package, we had a subcomponent, and that worked well. The problem is, does this still work in like a modularized way? Is still useful? And I just want to pause here for seconds, and I want to talk about like Dagger versus Coin. Because some people might say, well, let's just use Coin. No, but Dagger is better. But Coin is not really a dependency injection framework. It's just a locator service. I don't care, really. I think you should use whatever you want, as long as you understand what you're doing. So if you don't want to understand something, then just don't use it, right? When I moved from the Sky Sports team to the MySky team, they were rebuilding the app from the ground up. That was one of the questions, and I just told them, if you want to understand Dagger, I'm happy to explain everything to you, but you have to be willing to understand what it does behind the scenes, because otherwise it doesn't make any sense to me that we use that. And if you really think about this, forget about TDD or BDD or things like that. We don't really do that. What we do is SOD. And this is a real concept. So this is what we do in reality, right? We say, I want to use Dagger because it's cool, so I'll just go to Stack Overflow. I'll copy paste some code. I'll put it somewhere. I don't even know if that's the right place, but hey, it's working, so I'll just leave that there. And you're just creating a bunch of problems for the future. You're creating bugs, you're creating memory leaks, and all because you didn't want to understand how something worked. You just wanted to make it work as soon as possible. So after the whole streaming, this is some snippets of the code for our Dagger implementation after this whole thing. It's quite hilarious. So here we have a provides method, so annotated with singleton, I guess singleton scope, but hey, whoever did this, it was like, well, you know what? I don't really trust this singleton thing, so let me just create an atomic reference and create my own implementation of a singleton, because, yeah, I don't think that's going to work. This is another example where we're injecting this utility class, but we want to check if that's null, because otherwise we don't want to do the whole injection, because Dagger is not going to do that for us, right? And then I can go on and on with, what is this streaming module main? Well, that's something that implements this interface. And what is this module helper? Well, module helper is this other interface that has some other things. And I can go on with the base nav object register, whatever that thing is. And I could be here for like the next 6 hours trying to explain how this thing works. But it just doesn't make any sense. So the whole reason is because who did this didn't really understood how Dagger worked, and it was just committed to make everything work with subcomponents. And one of the problems with subcomponents is that, let's say that you have your app, your streaming module, right? So your app needs a reference to the streaming subcomponent, which is fine, because that creates a dependency that goes downstream, which is what we want. But if we go to an activity on the streaming part of it, you can see that it needs a component from the app, which creates a dependency upstream. So now we have a cyclic dependency. This doesn't work. Yay. So we just ditched subcomponents, and instead we ended up with something like this, just with like plain component dependencies. So what we have now, you can see this is kind of like old, because now it's in Kotlin, and this is actually Java. So we have a streaming component here that depends on our core component. And then whenever we want to create a component, what we use is one of these interfaces. So these interfaces are the ones that are going to provide us with the different components. And the application is the one that's going to implement all these interfaces. So in the case of the Sky Sports application, which is the common one, this is how that works for core components. So you can see that we always return the same component, because if we were returning different components, then we will be breaking all our scopes. And if we go to the UK part of it, here we extend from the Sky Sports application, which is going to give us access to the core component and the app component that we need. So once we create the streaming component, we can actually get the core component as a dependency because we have that interface. And the same way we can get the app component to give us the user that we needed in the first place. And how this whole thing ties together in the activity within the streaming module is by using this helper, which we give the application context. And the streaming helper, the only thing that does is just checking that the context actually implements that interface. And if it does, then it just returns the component. So the TLDR is that no matter what you do, just understand what you're doing, and obviously share that knowledge. Because if you're not sharing that knowledge and you get hit by a bus, then the whole thing is lost again. And this kind of like brings me to always follow the KISS principle, which, you know, it's keep it simple, stupid. And I know a lot of people that are very smart, and they come up with crazy solutions, and they work. Like this whole Dagger implementation, that works. But no one understood that. Like, it took me probably like a week to actually understand what the whole thing was doing. And if you're one of those persons and you really think that you're too smart to fail, well, just think again, because if one person in the team can really understand what you're doing, you're already failing. And I'll give you more examples about this. This is something that I wrote when the IntoMap API came in Dagger. I think it was with 2.3 probably. So what I'm doing here is I'm just injecting, I'm putting a lot of factories in a map that then I'm going to be injecting into different places. And this is fine. I thought that was cool, and it's all right. But this is kind of like the same thing. And so arguably, this is probably a bit more readable if you don't really know what the IntoMap API does and how that works. So think about that. And this is like a crazier example. So one of the things that we do in Sky Sports is that we download a JSON file, like a config file, for like some internal stuff. It's like a very small JSON file. It's like 14 lines of code or so. So this is the actual implementation that we had at one point. So we have a config class which has a map, and that map has config sections. So a config section is an interface like this. To use that, you also needed to use this config deserializer thing, which had a config section deserializer there, which again is yet another interface that extends from config section. So if I wanted to add like a force upgrade section in my JSON file, I had to do something like this. I had to create this force upgrade deserializer, which implemented the config section deserializer, which uses a force upgrade class, which is this class that implements config section. And if at this point you don't think this is crazy, it's because you probably wrote this code. So just make things simple. Right? It's just a JSON file. You don't need all this. And when I saw this is the actual commit message that I wrote. And I actually had to tweet about this. So almost 3,000 deletions for parsing a JSON into a class. That's crazy. I think we had like 18 classes just to do this. It just makes no sense at all. So simplify everything as much as possible, which maybe means asking the question like, well, do we really need core? So if we move back to the streaming example, right? So we know that streaming needs a user and app has a user. But probably other features are going to need this user class as well. So where do we put this user class? Well, let's move it to core, right? Because it's the only place that everyone is going to depend on. So it kind of like makes sense. But now we have the AboutMenu module, which also depends on core. So my question will be, why the AboutMenu has access to all the user APIs? It doesn't make sense. What if you have other libraries there that are a bit more like safety-minded that you shouldn't really be using? Right? There are things that you shouldn't do, and one of them is just open up all your classes to every single module that can use them. So maybe you can just take that user and put that into a different module, and that's it, right? Fix. Everything's fine. Now what you're probably going to have is like, I don't know, 100 modules with just one class in it, because you're going to be doing that for every single class that you have there. So instead, maybe what you can do here is you can create your own implementation of user in the streaming module. So now you have a streaming user. It's not a user anymore. And the app is the one that's going to be responsible to transform that user into a streaming user. And I think like if you actually think about your modules and you treat them as if they were a library that you wanted to open source, I think that's even better. Because now you're not thinking about how can you integrate that module with your app. What you're doing now is you're thinking how can you make this module work in isolation without having to worry about your app at all. But again, maybe. Because maybe you don't really want to share your feature modules with other apps. So again, remember what I said at the beginning, just take this with a pinch of salt and then just use it if it makes sense to you, because this might massively overcomplicate everything that you do. So now back to testing. Of course, you need to test your modules. And I talked to you about this concept of showcase app, which what it was is the idea of we should have an app that can showcase all of our features and all the different combinations that you can do with our features. And this is the only app that should be unit tested and end-to-end tested with expression and things like that. And we try to do that. But just think about this for a second, right? Just, I don't know, think about 3 libraries and try to build an app that showcases every single feature in those 3 libraries, and then you go and try to test the whole thing, see if that works. This obviously didn't work, and that's why we had those problems with the test at some point, where everything was so unreliable, and it was a nightmare. And we spent a lot of time trying to build this, because it's what other people wanted us to do, and that's the people that gave us the money. So instead, what we do now is we just have sample apps. So every feature module that we have now has a sample app, and that's where we do all our testing. And this is also a nice way to decouple the feature from the app, because now you have a place to actually put your feature to. So now you can get your sample app, you can put your feature there, you can test what it does, and that's it. And this is like a pretty good place to be in, because like I said, implementing this in the app is going to be hacky, and this is probably going to lead you to add some hacky code in your module as well. So this is a very nice way to avoid that problem. And to finish off, this is another problem that you're probably going to come up with if you're trying to modularize. So having a resource conflict, which is something that you might have experienced if you're using a third-party library that's using a resource with a very common name. So an example will be if you have an app, core module, and streaming module, and you have a string called test. So if I execute this code, then it's going to show my test, because it's the only string that we have. If I now create another string in core with the same name, then what's going to happen is that I execute this thing, and it's going to show me the string that I have in core. And the only reason for this to happen is because the dependency that I have declared first comes from core. If I swap them, and I execute this code again, then it's back to the string that we have in the streaming module. And then, of course, if I add a string with that name in my app, that's the one that's going to take precedence, and that's the one that's going to be showing. So a way to avoid this is actually quite simple. You can just prefix all your resources with the module name, for instance. So you could, rather than calling test, you could call it like core_test, for instance. And the problem with this is quite actually easy to forget about doing it. So an easy way to force you to do it is to have a lint check that's going to force you doing this. So what you can do is in your Gradle file, in the Android section, you can just have a resource prefix there, add the prefix that you want to use. So now every time that you have a string that doesn't really have that prefix, then lint is going to throw an error for you, and it's going to undo that you have to do that. So to quickly recap, I think like the main learnings that we had is that in our case, in this world of features that we want to reuse and that we want to change the behavior of some of them, I think the app is kind of like the whole thing, like the glue that holds everything together, because the app is the only module that knows about all the other modules. So if you want to change the behavior of a module, depending on the app that you're working on, yes, we could have things like, is UK app equal true or false? Or is Germany app equal true or false? Or things like that, and then change the behavior based on that. But it's much cleaner if you just let the app do all that work, and then you don't have to worry about it. Testing is also going to be way easier for you as well, because your module doesn't really care about that implementation. Your app will. So now you have actually a very nice way to test these different things as well. And if you treat your feature modules as library, also it's going to make the whole thing a bit easier, because otherwise you're going to be compromising your modules. And that's the only thing that you don't really want to know. and you want to use them as soon as possible. So integrate your modules as soon as possible, because the worst thing that you can have is 20 modules that are not being used anywhere. And we've had actually quite a few of those, because we're just saying, oh, let's wait until the app is ready for this. The app is not going to be ready in a month. It's not going to be ready in 3 months. It's going to take a long time for the app to be ready to do this. So you don't want to wait that long. And then last thing is that I think that everything should be as simple as possible, but not simpler. So don't overcomplicate things. And this is it's a very easy thing to do. It's so easy to start thinking about, oh, but I need a user. I need a user to sign out. So I need to create another module for like a menu, and I need that user somewhere else. So it's very easy to start working around these things and start just overcomplicating the whole thing, because nothing kind of like makes sense to you at that point. So just try to not overcomplicate things, and that's not a simple thing to do. And with this, here you have some resources. So that's a repo that I have with like this Dagger implementation that we use in this modularized world. There's like a few posts as well about modularization that I wrote. And if you're interested, those are the slides right there. So thank you very much.